Time now for the 10-minute war as we bring in our good friend and perhaps the one and only reasonable bucknut we've ever found. Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, is his channel here on YouTube, and it's outstanding, particularly for off-season information. Good to see you again, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I'm a little sad that football's completely gone now for another 7 months or so, but we've made it for the past 40 years, at least I have. So we'll get there.
170 or so days until the Hall of Fame game there in your home state of Ohio. About 191 or so days until Northwestern and Nebraska kick off the season there, and I think it's in Dublin, Ireland. So it'll be here, brother, before you know it. It'll be here before you know it. Let's get to what I opened the show talking about, because I know this is going to sound like balderdash and heresy. But when you lay it out, I think it's entirely possible that Jim Harbaugh ended up hiring a better coaching staff on the fly here while trying to get himself another coaching job, by the way. He's just an agent of chaos, Mark. It's what he does, man. That's just, if it's zany, wacky, weird, erratic, that's how he rolls, man. It's just his way. I think it is absolutely possible. So let's throw these up there on the screen again. You look at this offensively, and a lot of these are the same guys that were here last year in the same positions. So if you look at the offensive side of the football, you've got Matt Weiss still coaching quarterback, Sharon Moore. I mean, this is the number one offensive line in the country last year. You've got Mike Hart still coaching running backs. You're moving Ron Bellamy over to a position coach position that he's more of a natural for, and he could very well be the best recruiter on the staff. I think you're going to hear a lot from Grant Newsome as a future star. Remember, he's a young man that was on his way to being an All-American at Michigan before one of the worst knee injuries for an offensive lineman you'll ever see. And, I don't think you can say right now that Weiss and Sharon Moore are better than Gaddis. But you know me, I don't think Gaddis was that good. He had one good year here, and it was largely by reverting to his head coach's philosophy. So on the offensive side, I think it probably just comes down to how good do you think Josh Gaddis was. But what do you think?
Well, I think with all the zaniness and inconsistency, the one thing that is consistent about Jim Harbaugh that needs to be consistent with any coach that succeeds at high levels is that you surround yourself with a good coaching staff. And so he's been able to do that at Stanford, San Francisco, in the NFL. And now with a reset at Michigan, the original staff and the variations of it for the first 6 years or so were good, but the reset worked and got them to the playoff in 2021. So I have confidence, number one, first and foremost, before dissecting the individual track records, in Jim Harbaugh's ability to surround himself with good people and a staff that's going to succeed. The second thing that we see on both sides of the ball is the Ravens connection. Now, coaching is a fraternity and is always connected to hiring. You hire the people that you're comfortable with, that you know, that somebody else can recommend. That's a thread throughout coaching hires across the country, but not to this degree. So it's a conservative approach to a certain extent, but hey, it worked during the reset. And I think if you're going to go with an NFL head coach and John Harbaugh, he knows what he's doing. They bring in guys. Shoot, Matt Weiss, before this past season at Michigan, worked there in Baltimore since 2009. So just an incredible track record for him. And then in regards to having the multiple roles combining for the coordinators on both sides of the ball, the only thing you need to make sure of there is that they understand their roles. They understand who owns what and that they can work together. I think about Greg Schiano and Alex Grinch at Ohio State, two tremendous minds on the defensive side of the ball. Put them together, train wreck, didn't work for whatever reason. Maybe egos clashed, but certainly concept and approach did. So just got to make sure guys on both sides of the ball know their roles.
Looking at the defensive side, Mark, I think on defense, they clearly have a better staff than what they had at this time a year ago. So if you look at the defensive staff, you look at Jesse Minter. Now, I think the wrong Michigan assistant won the Broyles. I thought Mike McDonald should have won it. I thought that he saved Jim Harbaugh's job and therefore is the number one major reason for the springboard season that we just had. But if you look at going into last year, Mike McDonald had no previous coaching experience whatsoever. So as we run through the defensive coaches, you have Jesse Minter. He's actually coordinated a defense on the collegiate level. Michigan tried to hire him last year, by the way. He just ended up taking the Vanderbilt DC job as opposed to a position coaching job here. You elevate Steve Klinkscale, who is one of the better DB coaches in the country, and he earned it with what he did in year one, turning that secondary around contractually. They had to reach certain thresholds for him to get the promotion, and they did. Mike Elston, to me, is a massive upgrade. Sean Nua has other than last year when he had Aiden Hutchinson, has been really underwhelming as Michigan's defensive line coach, one of the weaker recruiters on the staff. Now you're bringing in a guy who's considered one of the best technician coaches at this position, one of the best recruiting coaches in the country. I think that's a huge upgrade. You have George Hilo in the same spot. And to me, the question now is moving Jay Harbaugh, who has coached at Michigan, Jim's son. He's coached tight ends and twice, but then running backs in between. And he did that in 2020. That was an unmitigated disaster. Now, if you try to be fair to Jay Harbaugh, maybe that whole season was a disaster and he just got caught up in it. We don't know. But this is a new position for him. Now he does have, again, a top DB coach there in Klink to kind of mentor him along the way. But from a recruiting standpoint, McDonald didn't recruit at all. All right, and you're bringing in Minter here, who was the recruiter of the year when he was a DC in the Sun Belt. So from a recruiting standpoint, this is a clear upgrade. From an X's and O's standpoint, I think it's no worse than even. I mean, Minter comes out of the same coaching tree, as you just mentioned, that McDonald does. So I think on the defensive side, this is clearly a better staff than they had at this time a year ago.
So, Steve, what I like here is the combination DC. Is, again, if it works, guys know their roles, they know where they stand, and they know how to cooperate and work together. You got Klinkscale, who knows the team, knows the personnel, and he's ingrained in the system. Then you bring in a guy with fresh ideas in Jesse Minter. Every stop, he has improved the situation. Indiana State, marginal team, marginal program, marginal defense, brought them to a top 5 level. Georgia State, they had the best scoring points per game defensive improvement from one year to the next under his leadership. The Baltimore Ravens, across the board, statistically advanced metrics in the secondary during his tenure in 2017 and 18 improved. Vandy will push them aside. Of course, it's a tough go in the SEC, and it was just the one season. So I love the combination with Klink and with Minter in particular.
So when you lay this all out, even if you don't agree with me that this is arguably on paper a better staff than they had at this time a year ago, because I think it clearly is. But now the work begins with the spring, right? And so we'll find out. But at the very least, the fact that you are able to put this together in a relatively short amount of time, after losing both coordinators and all of the whatever that was, the search for Jim's white whale or whatever we had to do here for the last few weeks, that's a hell of a staff. Whether you think it's better than last year or not, Mark, that's a hell of a staff to put together here in just a couple of weeks, coming off of what looked like, frankly, a clown show.
And to my first point, I think that is one of the keys to Jim Harbaugh's success across the board throughout his career. That doesn't get talked about enough is that, and that holds true for any successful head coach in the NFL, college football, surrounding yourself with a good coaching staff and understanding who works together, who can do what, and piecing that together and having an eye for talent. And I think he really does. And I didn't give it much of a thought until I looked at this situation that you presented this week with this assembling of a new coaching staff.